President Yoon Suk-yeol's legal battle at the Constitutional Court regarding his impeachment appears to be nearing an end, with the 10th formal hearing taking place today. With more on this edition of Press Perspective. Welcome to Thursday's edition of Press Perspective for February 20th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today, we touch upon the president's impeachment trial, which appears to be drawing to a close. For more on this, I have Thomas Maresca with news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I also have Professor Cho Hee-kyung at Hongik University joining our talk virtually. As always, Professor Cho, it's a pleasure.
Thanks for inviting me.
Right, Thomas, we'll start here. Let's begin with the latest with regard to the president's impeachment trial. Now, it is still taking place as we speak, right?
Yes, that's correct. I would just start off by saying this is actually a very historic day because Yoon, in the morning, attended the first preliminary hearing of his criminal trial. So, you know, a separate thing. This is the criminal charges he's facing for insurrection. So, which is also the first time a sitting South Korean president has faced a criminal trial. So just kind of an extraordinary day in itself that he was at one trial in the morning, and then he did appear at the impeachment trial in the afternoon, I think just very briefly, though, and then left afterwards. So the impeachment trial is, you know, it does seem that this is perhaps the last day. I mean, the professor might know more clearly, but from what I've heard and read, this will be kind of the last day of witness testimony and sort of whatever evidence that they're presenting. And today, scheduled to appear were Han Duck-soo, the former prime minister, and then the acting president who was, you know, impeached soon after Yoon was impeached, and he's facing his own impeachment trial. Cho Hee-kyung, who is the commissioner of the National Police Agency, and Hong Jang-won, who was the deputy director of the National Intelligence Service. And so those are the three main, witnesses that were called on to testify. And, you know, I think the professor can also speak more to what the points of contention are that they're still working on. I mean, I think it's still a bit of this back and forth over whether Yoon ordered the arrest of the lawmakers, which the National Intelligence Service individual can speak to and has spoken about in the past. And so if this is indeed the basically like the final session with witness examination and main testimony, apparently there would still be some closing arguments which would proceed over, I guess, the next week, and then most people seem to be expecting a verdict to come then in like the middle of next month. You know, usually there's something around like a 2-week period. That's, I guess, historically been the case for the the court to make their rulings. So it's coming to a head rather soon, it appears.
Right, with pundits talking about a possible verdict out next month.
Yeah.
Thomas, you mentioned Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. Now, he is at the president's impeachment trial as a witness, but Prime Minister Han Duck-soo faces his own impeachment trial as well. How is that proceeding?
Right, so that, they had their first official hearing yesterday. There were a couple of preliminary hearings in the past, but former Prime Minister Han appeared yesterday, and this is over his own involvement in accusations of his involvement in the initial Yoon's martial law declaration, as well as some questions about his refusal to appoint new constitutional court justices while he was acting as the interim acting president, and so he was impeached just like a couple of weeks after Yoon's impeachment. And so he's facing his own trial. And yesterday it seemed that was going to just be the whole hearing, basically. It was a one-day trial. It lasted only about 90 minutes. And I mean, they discussed, his defense basically has been that he was not aware ahead of time about the martial law plans and tried to stop it. I mean, there are some questions. I think there was a hearing after the official, trial hearing over the question of whether there was a proper quorum to remove Han. That was something that his defense has been saying, where it was something like 191 members of the National Assembly voted to impeach Han, but they're saying, oh, there should have been the 200 figure necessary to impeach a president versus the 150 figure that is used for other kind of cabinet members. So there's some procedural questions about that, but that's basically this brief trial. And then that is also, there's also expected to be a decision from the court probably middle of next month as well. So both of these things are sort of dovetailing.
Right. Now, with regard to President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial, Professor Cho, do walk us through the legal argument of the president's defense team as shared back on Tuesday, I believe, at the Constitutional Court, and that of the parliamentary panel seeking his impeachment, Professor Cho.
Well, I think I might start with the National Assembly's arguments, because they essentially presented a final presentation of their case. So it would be basically like a closing argument in a civil or a criminal trial that they made on Tuesday. And it was expected, I think, by the court that the defense team do the same, but they weren't quite ready. So I will call it the prosecution team, because that's effectively their role, the National Assembly. They really set out a very coherent argument as to why President Yoon should be impeached, why the court should accept the motion to impeach that was passed by the National Assembly. And the crux of the argument is that Yoon committed a very serious breach of the Constitution through his illegal declaration of martial law, which did not meet the neither substantive nor procedural requirements that are set out under the Constitution, as well as Martial Law Act itself. And also his conduct subsequent to the declaration of martial law. For example, he did not order the troops to be withdrawn immediately after the National Assembly passed a motion to revoke the declaration, as he should have done under the law. And when afterwards, once the motion to impeach him was passed by the National Assembly, he simply rejected all calls to appear for questioning by the relevant authorities, including the prosecution, the police, and the CIO. And he even made the presidential compound into basically like a fortified fortress, and almost, set up a kind of a scene for like a violent conflict between the authorities, the law enforcement agencies that were trying to make the arrest or execute the arrest warrant that was validly issued by the court because he refused to attend questioning. And also his words of incitement towards his supporters that was challenging the jurisdiction of the courts, the validity of all the court orders, and his appearance before the Constitutional Court, I think, also added to the conviction that he really shouldn't be returned to presidential office, because he continually denied and essentially told untruths in the court. And so his entire conduct really did not show any evidence that he would actually be ready and willing to and able to uphold the Constitution and comply with the laws. So that was the prosecution, the National Assembly's argument. Now, the defense team, they really were not very well prepared on Tuesday. And they were actually asking the court, could they have extra time later on to present better arguments? But in the end, they ended up using up all of the 2 hours that they were given. But they went on in a rambling way about fraudulent elections, influence by China, all of these issues that really don't have anything to do with the actual trial itself. But the main argument seemed to be that a declaration of martial law is a prerogative of the president. Basically, it's an official and political act that a president can do when there is a national emergency. but they weren't really able to back it up with any coherent argument or persuasive argument that there was indeed a National Assembly. What they were pointing to the fact that the National Assembly was consistently blocking president's actions, they were impeaching high-level officials, and also all these allegations of fraudulent election, but none of them is proven, and they still don't meet the necessary conditions that are required under the law to actually give rise to circumstances for declaration of martial law. So, I'm not a betting person, but you can sort of see where the verdict, which way the verdict is going to go, I think.
Right then, Professor Cho, beyond the statements shared by the prosecuting team as well as that of the defense, how have the various testimonies at the president's impeachment trial affected public sentiment, do you think?
Well, I think the testimonies by the various witnesses were very interesting. And I'd like to point to two things. So one is that a lot of the witnesses called by the defense team, Yoon's team, expecting that they will be giving favorable testimonies to Yoon. For example, we're just seeing on the screen the head of the National Security Office, Intelligence Office, and he was supposed to be a friendly witness for Yoon's team, and he actually gave quite damning evidence for Yoon's team. So many of those witnesses called by the defense team actually turned into hostile witnesses, which is technical term for somebody that you call, but who actually end up turning against you. And two key witnesses, in my view, were Hong Jang-won, the deputy chief of the National Intelligence Office, and also Kwak Jong-gun, who is the commander for the Special Forces Team 707 that were actually sent to the National Assembly on that night. And those two were really unwavering in their testimonies that were given both within the court and outside of the court. As for the rest of the witnesses, many of them had already testified before the prosecution almost immediately after the 3rd of December last year. And the testimonies that they actually gave before the Constitutional Court differed in many aspects from what they testified before the prosecution, and those discrepancies were pointed out in the court as well. So they were not very credible in terms of their testimonial value. And Yoon himself really sort of seemed to make up things as on the fly. And if you wanted to lie about something, you should at least lie so that it's convincing and people would believe it, not lie and then sort of be found out almost immediately afterwards. So Kim Yong-han, the former defense minister, once again, he seemed to be almost colluding on the spot as he was giving evidence in the court with Yoon, because on that day Yoon was actually granted the privilege to question the witness himself, although afterwards he was denied this. And so Yoon was really making all these leading questions and putting those questions to Kim, and you could sort of see this untruth coming out of their mouths. And so I think it really sort of made them seem very it really lost their credibility for themselves, I think.
Right, and against the backdrop of the events at the president's impeachment trial, Thomas, quite a number of foreign media outlets have been highlighting the deepening political divide here in the country. What have been some of your more recent observations here?
Right. Well, it's certainly worth saying that there's already has been a fairly deep political divide, I would say, within South Korea. But really, since the martial law decree and then all of the sort of stages afterwards, I've been surprised, and I think most foreign media has been struck by how much there's been a rally around to support Yoon and just kind of the narrative structure that has given various factions kind of a sense of, coming together and a sense of purpose that, to follow just what Professor Cho was saying, it almost feels like no matter what happens in the trial, there's just this, an alternate media environment that a lot of particularly Yoon supporters seem to be kind of existing in, that it almost doesn't really matter what is being said or maybe what the facts of the case are. And so, a lot of it, immediately after the martial law decree, the initial reaction, I think nobody understood why he did it. The support was extremely low. It was like 13% or something. And, the support for impeachment was incredibly high. But, just in the days and weeks afterwards, Yoon kind of kept up this defiant attitude and sort of kept pushing forward this narrative that was really, some of it was about how the the opposition was blocking his agenda in the National Assembly, but it really started to take on these characteristics of this election fraud, China interference. I mean, new levels keep kind of getting added, and this is very much driven by this kind of alternate media sphere of, most of it is YouTubers, Twitter kind of accounts, And so, I mean, really, when you go out and speak to Yoon supporters at these rallies, I mean, they started to really build while he was in this kind of bunker-like situation in his residence before he was, detained by the, police and the CIO. It's just kind of taken on, it's almost the more that the trial is going on, it's almost, it's giving something for the supporters to rally around in a way that, it's sort of taking on a life of its own, and it's picking up elements from, specifically in the US, I mean, the Stop the Steal slogan has become central to this. And so, yeah, and it's just taken on an online life, and I think it's also drawn in people that were not so much activated, maybe as far as having a strong political leaning. I mean, there's always been, when I was first here, it was under the Moon Jae-in administration, and there was, before COVID, there was every weekend were massive rallies around Gwanghwamun of, anti sort of Moon supporters, and they were mostly elderly population and kind of maybe coming from a very traditionally like conservative base or stronghold. But we've seen, they have been there, but then we've seen it keeps attracting more, especially young men particularly. There's already been this gender political divide. So more and more young men are getting kind of drawn into it. So it's been fascinating to watch, for lack of a better word. I mean, kind of concerning. I mean, there's been just more and more disinformation kind of and conspiracy campaigns. I was reading about the head of the Constitutional Court now, the Justice Moon Hyung-bae, and he's been really just facing all of these charges online, these claims of child pornography, and there was a Chinese flag that was inserted in the background, and there was some claims that Elon Musk was calling him out online. And so, I mean, we're seeing these kinds of elements that they existed in the past, but they were much more fringe sort of, and now they've really become kind of part of the mainstream opposition.
Right. Professor Cho, quite a number of ruling party lawmakers have also sought to realign, if you will, realign themselves with the president, in sharp contrast to the distance they sought in the early days of the fallout from his brief imposition of martial law. How do you explain this reality, Professor?
I think they learned the wrong lesson from the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye. So when Park Geun-hye was impeached, when the motion to impeach her was actually going through, there was much more mainstream support by the then opposition party, now the ruling party, the Conservative Party within the National Assembly. And Kwon Sung-dong, for example, actually agreed to the motion to impeach her, and many of the lawmakers did that. And afterwards, they realized that that was the wrong political move. A lot of them were essentially considered to be betrayers in the eyes of the diehard Yeongnam region supporters of Park. And the Conservative Party, I think, at the moment, feels that they still need to be seen to be supporting Yoon. And so this is why they were making these visits to Yoon while he was being held in custody. And they are also still making all these outlandish claims about the kind of allegations that Yoon's defense team is making, even though they know fully well, and in the past they have said the exact opposite before. But I expect that as soon as Yoon's impeachment motion is ratified by the court, they will immediately withdraw all support from Yoon and just simply prepare for the upcoming presidential election. And you can see a little bit of signs of that already. But essentially, they are going along with it at the moment because they want to make sure that they are kept on side with what seems to be Yoon's core supporters of about 25% of the population. But once the court verdict is handed down and they realize that they cannot really prolong or lengthen the trial any longer until April or something, then they will switch tactics and they will essentially try to cut ties with Yoon.
Right. Thomas, what are some of the stories perhaps that the international media looks to cover with regard to Korea's political paralysis going forward?
Well, I think clearly these next few weeks are going to be filled with, assuming the verdicts are coming out from the impeachment hearing of Yoon, I mean, to a lesser extent of Han Duck-soo too, but clearly that's going to be kind of the main story, and then what that entails, that kicks in this next process of, preparing for the, it's 60 days till the next presidential election. So suddenly we're going to be in an election season, and then who's going to come forward from the People Power Party side will be part of that. So I think that's, clearly going to be on the horizon. I mean, I think all of this is happening at a time when there's so much going on globally that's going to affect Korea as well. Of course, I mean, just with the new Trump administration in the U.S., there's a lot of areas from just tariffs and things to possible, security arrangements with North Korea. So that will kind of be very much in the mix as well. And I think, I mean, just today, there's just starting now some four-party talks among some of the political leaders, the two political party leaders and the National Assembly Speaker and the interim president, just to discuss some of these other very pressing issues that are that do need to be addressed, from kind of just economic issues. They're trying to pass a semiconductor act to help boost the semiconductor industry here. There's discussions about reforming the pension scheme that I think we were talking about this a bit the last time, about the aging society, and just kind of in general, a supplemental fund to help boost the economy, because there are already concerns about the economy reacting to, say, tariffs or other global uncertainties. So there's multiple kind of domestic issues that are happening in the midst of the greatest sort of political crisis in a while. And so we'll see too, I mean, we're going to look for what is the reaction of the verdict going to be. Will this push kind of a constitutional crisis further? How will Yoon supporters react? So I think this next month plus is going to be filled with a lot of stories to cover.
For sure, the next few weeks, where we'll see, well, most pundits believe we'll see a verdict next month then. All right, I'm afraid we'll have to end there for today. Thomas, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
You.
Professor Cho, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us again same time tomorrow.